For decades, California has leveraged its enormous market power to shape national vehicle policy, often pushing regulations far beyond its borders and into daily lives of Americans who never voted for them. That long-running dynamic just hit a major roadblock. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, has taken formal action to block California's latest attempt to regulate heavy-duty trucks nationwide, signaling a significant shift in the balance between state ambition and federal authority. At issue is California's heavy-duty inspection and maintenance requirement, a rule embedded in the state's air quality plan that would have applied not only to trucks registered in California, but to any heavy-duty vehicle operating within the state, including those registered in other states or even other countries. In plain terms, a truck hauling goods from Texas, Ohio, or Mexico could have been forced to comply with California's rules simply by crossing its borders. The EPA has now proposed to disapprove that requirement, citing serious constitutional and statutory concerns. This matters far beyond California. Heavy-duty trucks are the backbone of the American economy. They move food, building materials, fuel, medicine, and consumer goods across state lines every single day. Any rule that increases costs or limits access for those vehicles ripples through the supply chain and shows up in higher prices at the checkout counter, even if your purchases come from Amazon or any online retailer. The EPA's action recognizes that reality and draws a clear line between environmental policy and unlawful overreach. According to the EPA, California's proposal appears to violate the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, which exists to prevent individual states from interfering in interstate trade. The Clean Air Act also requires state implementation plans to be consistent with federal law, and the agency argues that California's approach fails that test. By attempting to regulate out-of-state and foreign-registered vehicles, California moved into territory that the Constitution reserves for the federal government. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin did not mince words in explaining the decision. He argued that California was never elected to govern the entire country, and that its regulatory ambitions, particularly in the name of climate policy, have increasingly imposed higher costs on Americans nationwide. From the EPA's perspective, allowing one state to dictate trucking standards for the rest of the country undermines both federal law and economic stability. There's also a foreign policy dimension that rarely gets discussed. California's rule would have applied to vehicles registered outside the United States, despite the fact that the authority over foreign commerce and international relations rests exclusively on the federal government. That alone raises red flags and reinforces the EPA's conclusion that the state exceeds its legal authority. This proposed disapproval does not exist in isolation. It follows a broader effort by the federal government to rein in California's unique emissions waivers and enforcement strategies. Earlier this year, the Department of Justice filed complaints against the California Air Resources Board, known as CARB, arguing that the state was effectively enforcing preemptive federal standards through agreements with truck and engine manufacturers. Those actions suggest growing concern in Washington that California has been using informal pressure and market leverage to achieve regulatory goals that could not withstand direct legal scrutiny. In other words, this is illegal and it needs to change. The issue of waivers is central to the story. For years, California has received special permission under the Clean Air Act to set its own vehicle emission standards, with other states allowed to follow if they wish. Under the previous administration, the EPA granted waivers to the California Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks, and Heavy-Duty Engine Omnibus NOx rules. Supporters frame them as environmental progress. Critics warn that they would raise vehicle prices, which they did, limit consumer choice, which it did, strain the electric grid, which it did, and force rapid changes the market was not ready to absorb, which it did. In June 2025, Congress used the Congressional Review Act, or the CRA, to overturn those waivers, and the resolutions were signed into law by President Trump. That was a clear statement from lawmakers that the vehicle standards should be a national scope, not dictated by one single state, regardless of its size or its political influence. The EPA's latest action builds on that message by reinforcing the principle that the environmental policy must operate within constitutional boundaries. Supporters of California's approach often argue that the state has long been the leader in air quality improvements and technological innovation. That's true, up to a point. California's early emission standards helped accelerate cleaner engines and better fuel systems. But leadership becomes something else when it turns into compulsion, especially when it disregards regional differences, economic realities, and legal limits, all for political power. The heavy-duty truck sector is a perfect example. Unlike passenger cars, trucks operate on thin margins and long replacement cycles. Fleets make purchasing decisions based on reliability, infrastructure availability, the total cost of ownership, and more. Mandating technologies before they are ready and widely supported by infrastructure does not accelerate progress. It creates shortages, higher costs, and unintended consequences, which it has. And when those mandates come from a single state but affect national commerce, the risk multiplies big time. California's regulatory influence has not been limited to vehicles. The state has already forced manufacturers to stop selling gasoline-powered lawnmowers and small engines, again, using its market size to compel compliance. For years, automakers and equipment manufacturers have been quietly adapting products nationwide to meet California's rules because it was cheaper than producing separate versions for each state. That strategy effectively allowed one state to set de facto national policy without national vote or congressional approval. The EPA's move suggests that era may be coming to an end. By challenging California's heavy-duty inspection requirement, the agency is asserting that environmental goals do not justify ignoring constitutional structure. The law stands. Clean air matters, but so does the rule of law, economic practicality, and the ability of Americans to move goods freely across state lines. The proposed disapproval is now open for public comment, and after which the EPA will decide on final action. Whatever the outcome, the signal is unmistakable. Federal regulators are no longer willing to automatically defer to California's ambitions, especially when those ambitions collide with federal authority and national economic interests. This is not about rejecting environmental progress or innovation. Automakers and engine manufacturers continue to invest heavily in cleaner, more efficient technologies because consumers demand them and because they make business sense. The difference is between progress driven by markets and engineering versus progress imposed by mandates and government regulations that ignore cost, infrastructure, and constitutional limits. For truck drivers, fleet operators, manufacturers, and everyday consumers, the EPA's action represents a recalibration. It reaffirms that the vehicle regulation should be consistent across the country, not dictated by one state's ideology or political priorities. It also underscores a broader truth that has been easy to forget in recent years. Environmental policy works best when it respects both economic reality and the legal framework that holds the nation together. California will no doubt continue to push aggressive policies, and debates over emissions, electrification, and climate goals are far from over. But for now, the federal government has drawn a line. In doing so, it has reminded the country that clean air and constitutional governance are not mutually exclusive, and that neither should come at the expense of the freedom to move goods, do business, and make choices in a truly national market. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, and if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.